What's next? Whatever it is, it's coming at us faster every day from every corner of the globe. What's next isn't where it used to be. It's everywhere else, and it's relentless. Some companies think what's next only happens through R&D or acquisitions. For them, what's next might be fatal. The most innovative companies are partnering with startups to do more with less, to hack problems, and to unlock growth. The most innovative companies turn to VentureFuel to solve their corporate challenges with innovative solutions. Our global innovation network includes over 500 leading venture capitalists, universities, accelerators, and angel investors. Heck, even our scouts have scouts, which is why at any given time, we have eyes on up to 2 million vetted startups around the world. But you don't care about 2 million startups. You care about the ones that can solve your problem, which is why we don't give you lists. We deliver custom vetted solutions. So whether you want to transform innovation across your company, or solve an immediate challenge with tangible results, or simply discover what's possible, VentureFuel helps you inject innovation to stay ahead of the pace of change. What's next? What's next is now.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Fred Schonenberg. I'm the founder of VentureFuel, and I'm thrilled today to be hosting this Ask Me Anything session with Danielle Cohn. So I first met Danielle 7 years ago or so when she was heading up Comcast Lift Labs, the startup engagement platform there. She's now the CEO of Wave Ventures, which she will talk a lot about. But really the goal of today is to unpack what it is to launch an innovation program that includes startups at a large corporation. One of my favorite parts of getting to know Danielle is we've been thought partners on both sides of the equation, thinking about models, frameworks, all the iterations within those, what works for one organization doesn't work for another, and so how do you customize those? So it's been a great pleasure to have those conversations in private, and we thought, oh, we should do this in public and give other corporates that are starting this journey of thinking about the next evolution of R&D and corporate strategy, right? How does corporate innovation really scale successfully and deliver results? And so we thought we'd host this Ask Me Anything. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Danielle to the stage. Danielle, it's so nice to see you.
Hey, Fred, it's always great to see you. Thanks for inviting me on, and congratulations on the latest Lift Labs cohort. Looks amazing.
Oh yeah, the Laura and Luke and the entire team at Comcast continues to evolve that program, and we're very fortunate to get to work with them on a daily basis and think through how that continues to become better and better. And that's part of this, right? It's like you're always iterating on what the KPIs are and the pillars and taking things to the next level. So thank you. We're very excited and proud of where it is today and where it's going in the future. But maybe to reverse course, let's go back to the beginning of that conversation. Can you talk about how Lift Labs began, maybe even the press release before you were hired?
Yeah, it's actually coming up on the 10th anniversary of when Startup Engagement, which became Lift Labs at Comcast NBCU, started as really an idea. And there was a press release in January of 2014 that announced that Comcast was going to be building a second building in its headquarters city of Philadelphia called the Comcast Technology Center, and that it would be built. And the lead paragraph at the end of it said it would, quote, offer space for local technology startups, period. And at the time, I was the head of marketing communications for the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. I had worked very closely with a lot of executives at Comcast over the years, was very involved in the Philadelphia startup ecosystem as a founder myself, and then also helping to work on the Startup PHL Seed Fund. And from there, I got recruited to essentially, with blank sheet of paper, figure out what that sentence meant almost 10 years ago now, and to build out what became a best-in-class function from scratch.
Well, I loved the way you approached it, and we've talked about this before, but maybe you could share with everybody, is you didn't just jump in and start trying stuff. You really took time to interview a couple of different stakeholders, obviously internal. Why are we doing this as Comcast? What are the KPIs? What's the strategy? But also going out and talking to external partners, talking to the actual founders, really doing like a little bit of a ecosystem deep dive and interviewing of what's working, what's not working in this corporate startup collaborative space.
Yeah, we definitely took a community-centered approach, both internally and externally. And we had done a ton of research. I had actually, before I started in this role, had done a ton of research kind of for fun around corporate startup partnerships and accelerators around the world. It was something that I was just personally really passionate about. I saw the impact that cities had as a result of entrepreneurship. And so when I was given this amazing opportunity, we did a ton of research ourselves. We also did bring in a few consulting companies. In our early days, we laid out very thick, 100-page strategy decks to support why we wanted to do what we were doing, build out rubrics around, why you build an accelerator, what are all the various models, who are the potential partners, what are the innovation frameworks that existed back then, and obviously they've really morphed since then. What are staffing models? And so we also met with, and I was so lucky to meet a handful of corporate leaders at other companies, many of which I think you've now met, Fred, over the years as well. And they were such helpful advisors. And I would ask each one of them, if you were to do it again, what would you keep? What would you change? How would you do it differently? And where would you suggest we start? And then at the same time, started to have similar conversations internally at Comcast NBCU with executives, not just our executive champion, who's the Chief Business Development Officer, but across the business. And our goal was really to make sure we weren't doing innovation or this work in a silo or on an island. And then separate of that, we really started to go out into the community and ask founders what were they in it for, and what had they seen as successful programs or not. That's where we started.
Yeah, I love it. And I think the interesting, like the peer-to-peer other corporates that were doing this type of work, and what can you learn from them, what mistakes that they had. You and I have talked about this for a number of years, but we launched something at VentureFuel called VentureFuel Connect. And even before that, we were doing these dinners, innovator dinners, where we would bring together corporates and just say, hey, you guys are all corporate innovators. Maybe you're a CVC, maybe you're chief strategy officer, chief business officer. Let's have dinner together. No agenda, just talk. And the value that everyone got out of that, right? Because it's kind of unique work, and you can pick from different folks, and it's a really cool part of this community, right? Because people that are in this are not competing with each other. So there's a real collaborative opportunity between different corporates. It's something which we try to be the facilitator of that a lot of times. I think what's interesting though is if you think of these other corporates, when you get to their outputs of how they structure these programs, each one is a little different. And so I think what we advise people is, right, you start with what are the KPIs? What is the goal? What is the challenge as an organization? So could you maybe talk about that in the early days, what your goals were and how that guided your structure, and maybe then how it's, some of the pivots that happened after that point?
Yeah, we absolutely, well, first we worked like a startup. So we were always pivoting and open to ideas and listening to our customers who at the time were founders, our other customers who were internal business leaders who wanted to solve big problems or learn strategic insights. And just to follow up on the corporate sort of consortium that VentureFuel had pulled together for many dinners, which I've attended, the value of that is so incredible. As somebody who was really involved on the association tied to the travel and tourism industry for many years, there really isn't an organization that shares best practices across innovation teams in companies. And so just an amazing benefit of being in your network, Fred. And just in terms of the goals for our program, and they started, there were always 3 goals, 4 goals. They would shift a little bit each year based on priorities or where we were actually in our cycle, our life cycle of our program. And at a high level, I think it really depends. The goals, your program that you design really depends on your organization's goals and the level of support you have internally to actually do this work in a meaningful way, and to be really clear, not just on what our goals are, but how will we really, as a team, as a program, be measured against those goals. And is that commercial deals, acquisitions, employee engagement, NPS tied to founders, the brand lift, the list goes on, or is it are you sitting alongside of an investment team? The good news is today, so much of this intel is readily available, and actually you all make it, you share it in many ways in an open way. And so many new teams that are spinning programs like this up don't have to start from scratch, it jumpstarts you a year into my initial getting hired into the role. We essentially continued to sell this into the organization by creating the goals that I think most organizations have one or all of these motivations or goals. One is to really find innovative solutions. It's to be an early lens in the growth funnel to spot potential disruptions or emerging technologies, whether it's, today AI or VR, when we started 10 years ago, edge opportunities, or to really even find ways to gain efficiencies, save money for the company. The second was to learn the insights from the startups that can be leveraged by the business to really foster a startup mindset in everything that they do. The third was around employee engagement and to encourage teams to take risks, challenge their status quo, and even attract new tech talent, which was a goal when we were opening the Comcast Technology Center. And the last was, how do you take all of this good and create a real brand halo that helps position whatever company is you work in as an innovation company. And each of these things morphs as time goes on, the life cycle of your company or your program. Sometimes, the brand brand building is needed in the beginning, not needed as much. It still is needed, toward the middle end of programs. But a lot of times the reputational outcomes will authentically occur by doing the real work of product innovation and partnerships with startups.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You mentioned sort of spending a year to learn this stuff, and that now we can maybe skip that step. We started doing this, I'll call it like facilitated strategic brainstorm, where we have a Miro board and we sit with potential clients, and we kind of do this, Simon Sinek type of like, what's your why? Why are you doing this? What are the goals? What are those KPIs, those 4 pillars you mentioned, and then weight them, right? And we kind of come through this and we say, okay, after that, now that we've unpacked the why and what your challenges are, here's some of the best frameworks that other corporates are utilizing. And there are different flavors within all those, right? But like the goal is to take that year of exploration and say, hey, in an hour-long Zoom call, let's map out a couple different solutions for you. And then should that be aligned, how do you actually execute that as like stage 2? But that all came out of those, like the corporate consortium, the dinners together of hearing everyone like talking back and forth. And we're like, hey, by the way, like there's 10 other people that have the same problem. So it's really interesting. And you're right, as the program progresses and the years go on, those goals change, they morph, other opportunities pop up, which is crazy fun and interesting. I wanted to go back to something you said that you asked the other corporates early on as part of your exploration of like, if you could go back and do it again, what would you have done differently? I'm curious to kind of point that question your way and think about some of the learnings or maybe obstacles you overcame early days.
Oh, no obstacles. Yeah, right. Many. I think number one, community building takes a lot of time, marketing resources, and real people. before you even launch an accelerator, do you have relationships with founders or partners? What are you doing to build those relationships? How do you build trust? Not just with the founder that you meet in that moment, but their network, their angel network, their investor network, their peer network, so that you continuously get good, solid referrals of companies. We spent just as much time talking face-to-face with a diverse group of founders, asking for what had failed in other programs, and really took that to heart. And ultimately, I think that we really leaned in on keeping our doors very wide open for founders of all stages. They definitely came. Founders ultimately want a partner who will show up, test, and invest. And I think our earliest successes were framed around pilots, proofs of concept. Many programs, still to this day, that is not what they're focused on. Ours was really, could we help these companies get some level of traction within our company? And we did. And that actually became our program's secret sauce. That was why we had really high NPS numbers from both mentors that were involved internally as well as the founders themselves. And then in terms of obstacles, I would say that in every organization, there is a not built here mentality with some people, some leaders, or there could be a change of direction because there's a reorg, or someone that was really excited at the beginning of a program lost their budget, and now, or there's cost cutting happening, which meant that leader can no longer support a company that ends up in a program. And so, and then there was also, I think, one of the obstacles was even some founders just not being interested in early stage equity focused accelerators. And so in some ways, in our early days, we were appealing to what was really a relatively narrow slice of the startup ecosystem in the end. And some were strategic, but very different from where the program has shifted to today.
Yeah, it's also interesting, right? Because the KPIs and pillars have changed, and like initially it was very community driven and sort of the space in Philadelphia and engaging there, and that's still a very important part of it. But there are other elements that have grown over time. I think one of the things I would say to everyone watching and listening is, this is an Ask Me Anything. We want you all to be asking questions of Danielle, so please put any questions or things you're thinking about in the chat. I'll weave them in here, and then we'll go to full Q&A towards the back half. But don't feel like you have to save all your questions till the end. Feel free to start peppering them in, and I'll jump in. And Danielle and I have talked about this so many times. We can pepper in all sorts of different angles. One of the things I would ask you about is this, I'll call it friction between internal versus external. In that you want to build the internal functionality. You want this to be something that you can own as the corporate. But also, as you said, like you spent a year plus just talking to the startups and figuring out the community of angels and who their angels are and the scout of scouts and all those kinds of things. And there's some value of external partners that can hyper drive that / operate for you. But I would say the number one question I get is internal or external. What is that decision matrix, and how do you decide? So curious how you thought about that early days, what parts you wanted to do yourself versus have a partner help with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. It really depends on the program and what type of organization and the goals again. But finding great partners, I think, is one of the most important things. So we had partners and have, the program continues and has fantastic partners and has had partners since the very beginning. Part of the reason for partnering with outside organizations was to have an extended network and to have an extended team. And so it's, certain stages of programs are fine when they are very founder focused, and it is about helping the founders to raise money. It's really, that to me is more around like the an early stage accelerator that also benefits the founders. The focus is on the founders and on the community. And those are really important programs, and there are amazing partners out there who are doing that work. When it comes to building a team to run the function of an accelerator, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of resources. And I think the key is actually in, as much as I saw this, especially as we wanted to really pivot the program into more of a commercialization program, having partners who were flexible in their models, could customize their models, and they didn't have different types of goals than we had as a corporate partner. And the corporate partner was really their client. And it was, a relationship. And that was very much, the VentureFuel Lift Labs relationship. It isn't about the companies themselves, the founders themselves, teaching them how to raise money or teaching them how to do business with a large company. They're kind of already at that stage. The question around staffing was something throughout the process we looked at. And I remember each year, when you have to go into a company of any size and try to ask for headcount to support a program, it's really hard to get full-time staff. And I've always thought that these programs or, capabilities are really best met with a combination of internal resources. A core internal team does not need to be huge, but it certainly should not be one component of one person's role. It does take time and focus and somebody's dedication as the glue of the program, with internal business leaders and the founders of the companies that you're trying to partner with. So having a small but mighty team, which is what exists today still at Lift Labs, is critical. Still having an internal team. However, when we were really starting to look at, do we build out our own function of running our full accelerator, and what does that look like? The staffing behind that would have been really hard to make the case for. And so finding a partner like VentureFuel, and there was actually a woman on the team, Fielding Kidd. She had been tasked with spinning up a parallel program that we called Liftoff. And Liftoff was really meant to demonstrate the power of a later stage enterprise ready accelerator model that was sitting side by side with our super early stage accelerator. And what we discovered through that process was VentureFuel. So we diligenced a lot of different companies, and we chose VentureFuel. And Fielding, right before she actually left the company, she said, I know we've been talking about building this out as our own function and staffing up, but I really think VentureFuel is a great partner to do all of the operations behind the scenes. And it is, in many companies, a lot easier to create a relationship like that, a long-term partnership with a trusted partner, than it is to start staffing up. And so that's how we pivoted the program eventually down the road of really now fully focused on later stage enterprise ready, non-equity upfront program. And to Fred, your point earlier, a lot of the discussion of where it's landed started because of a brainstorm that Fred and I were having around flexibility and what's the new model going to look like? What does equity look like in the future of this model? And how do we continue to demonstrate value to the business so that this program and the companies that we're working with, are all seeing value? And it still exists, now going on 10 years later.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? you touched on a few things that are commonalities that we hear, which is, why are we doing this, right? And then, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Like, it's, what do we get out of this that makes this interesting? And should we take equity or not equity? Like, those things are all sort of intertwined in the model and how you do it. And I think one of the things that you all have done a just tremendous job of is building collaboration within the organization, stakeholders, really thinking through that, everybody come in and then thinking about what those outcomes are. And it's changed over time. I remember the very first conversation I had with anyone from Lift Labs. You introduced me to Fielding, and Fielding and I started talking. And at that point, you're thinking about communities, like, could you build these little hubs in different cities? And maybe that would be a way to get more startups coming in. And then we started talking about what became Lift Labs, that really was tied to the core of the business. And what does that look like from a commercialization standpoint? And then it was like, okay, where does equity fit in? Where does early stage versus late stage? And so it's been a real journey, which has been so fun. But when I think of some of our other clients or prospective clients early in their journey, the hesitation is often, what am I doing this for? Is it because I want to build a portfolio of early stage investments? Do I want acquisitions? Is it about insights? How would you advise a company that is not quite sure? How do they parse that out internally? That was a super long, convoluted question. I finally got to what I wanted to ask you, which is, like, how do you figure out what your why is for doing these programs?
Yeah. Well, one, I think that this is what we learned over the years was, if you do innovation on an island, in my opinion, it does not work in a large company, or really in any company. Two, having the buy-in from an executive champion is great, but ensuring that not just one executive champion is bought in, I think, is even more important. And so we spent a ton of time meeting with pretty much every executive who would meet with us to hear their pain points. Every year, we sat down with them right after our program would end, and we would say, okay, what's on your mind? What's keeping you up? What problems are you looking to solve? And we became the team that was really connecting these dots across a very large, complicated, complex company of Comcast, NBC, Universal Parks, Pictures, the list went on. And so we aligned with the business. That became, and why I think it is still running and still even more successful than when it started, was it's really been about strategic alignment with the business. And I think for someone starting out, my shoes 10 years ago, is really get to understand the goals and motivations behind your leaders for wanting to spin up programs like this. And are they willing to put the resources behind this, both in terms of, allowing you to find a partner if they're not allowing you to build a team, or understanding their why. And an innovation team can certainly say, we should do this because X, but if it doesn't align with the leader's vision and support, it won't work. And that was something we learned when we were talking to other corporate executives who were leading these programs in the past. What had failed was they did not feel like their company was really supportive of this work, and that the goals weren't aligned, and it wasn't clear how they were being measured. And so from the very beginning, we made it very clear why we existed, that we were part of a growth funnel. We sat within, and the team still sits within the business development space, sits alongside of Comcast Ventures and other growth areas. It is not a PR community impact program. It certainly has wonderful residual effects of that that have impacted community and PR. But understanding that it always has to have the strategic alignment back to the business, I think made it really clear for the focus. And and then each year we would go back to business leaders and essentially work with them on, okay, what are our 1, 2, 3 business focus areas for the year? And it's interesting, in the last couple of years, just really focused hyperly on AI, and that's something that impacts every part of the business.
I think one of the things that's neat, and like crazy shout out to Laura Plunkett, Luke Butler, Katie, like what is unique and that I've learned a tremendous amount to incorporate into all of our programs is this idea of going to the different business units to solicit pain points, to really understand what is an important problem that your team isn't able to address in the near term, right? Where's that gap? And the process of soliciting that gives you insight, right, into what would be interesting from a startup engagement thing. But then also bringing those people along for the next stage of the journey and saying, hey, by the way, we're looking at our midpoint check-in for the startups. We have a couple in the areas you mentioned. Come take a look. Oh, would you be interested in this one? This is interesting. Come along for the journey. Let's now extract those insights, share it with the rest of the business unit. And then it creates this continuum, and then inviting them all to the demo day or to some sort of end of program moment. What that does, to your point of not isolating, it's not one executive stakeholder. You now have multiple business units raising their hands, getting engaged, seeing the value of it, which gives a program real strength. And also to flip back to why would a startup be interested in joining a corporate accelerator versus anything else they could spend their time doing, is like they want deals. They want to work with that corporate. At the end of the day, that's what they want. And so what you're doing is building this amazing 360 program where the business units are seeing value, the startup engagement team is knowing where to look, what to look for. The startups are actually plugging into real business problems. It creates this beautiful sort of circle. And I think one of the things that we see with a lot of clients is they go, well, we know what the problems are. We're going to go find some things and plug them in. And there's value there. But I used to always fight the idea of like, there'll be a big demo day at the end. And what we've realized is like, this is collaborative. You have to bring other business units in. You have to have them see what the value is and almost do that internal marketing of why this is here. So you have other people raising their hands going, hey, I want to get involved. I'd like to figure out a way to do something like this. And it ends up being this very beautiful sort of circle to drive it forward.
And oftentimes I've seen and talked to other corporate partners who will tell me that, their business development teams, strategic development teams are not collaborative. They kind of work, in an island. And so when I started, one of my goals was really to be that connector across the enterprise and to pull executives into the process. And it's great that has continued. And I remember, Fielding and I used to go and meet with every executive, and Luke and I used to do that. And it has continued. And I think that is absolutely what has given, I think, this program such longevity. Is there are so many executives across the enterprise who believe it can solve problems. They have seen real results. They have found amazing companies to work with. And they've also learned a lot from those companies in terms of insights, in terms of culture. And so in some ways, it also was a moment, even during the pandemic, where we really saw that it was a galvanizing moment across the organization, where business leaders were getting really excited to, introduce or meet the next cohort that was coming in. And it energized not just the building in Philadelphia, but leaders across the country who were working with these companies. And so, yeah, it's sort of like community-centered design. The cross-company collaborative innovation, to me, is innovation, and where, I think everything's going now.
Can you talk a little bit about push versus pull. And there's somebody who runs a similar function at a very large CPG, and we've become similarly sort of friends and thought leaders on this. And they talked to me about their evolution. That initially the idea was, we're going to go find the best startups in the world, right? No matter what category, whatever problem they're solving. And then we're going to shop it internally and kind of say, hey, look, we found this cool thing. And they have evolved to the reverse, which is they go to their business units and say, what are you trying to solve for? What are your gaps? What are your growth opportunities? Now let's go find solutions. How do you think about that push-pull versus either starting with a problem versus starting with the tech in search of a problem?
Yeah, I mean, we went through that as well. And I think that you get a lot of inputs from a lot of founders and referrals across the world. And it's really hard to sift through all of those and find the right fit. And that was a big reason why we flipped our model and went on to the focus areas, because you cannot run a program that's a catch-all for all things to all people. It just does not work. But what we found was when you focused on a vertical, you would find that different parts of the company could find ways to work with the same company, but in different ways. That technology could be leveraged by Parks or Pictures or NBC or by Comcast Cable in very different ways, but they were all intersecting with this one company. And so, yeah, I'm a big believer in publish your areas of focus and hone in on the companies that are the most viable, who have traction already, and they're looking for maybe not their initial first customer, but their second, third scaling customer.
I'm about to go to Q&A. I see a good question from Dennis Slate that I'll throw in here. But before that, you just led right into something that I think about all the time, which is that second deal, that third deal, right? Because one of the things that's interesting is a lot of innovation teams, the knock on innovation teams from a startup perspective is this is a startup petting zoo. You're doing it for PR, halo effect. Maybe I'm going to get a $50,000 pilot and then I'm going to disappear. And by the way, you're going to burn my wheels. You're going to spend so much time for me to get that $50,000 pilot and it's not going to scale. No thanks. What Comcast is unbelievable at is really connecting that tissue of like, here's how you get in for the pilot. And by the way, here's the potential. And you're not here for the pilot. You're here for the potential. A lot of corporates come to me and say, how do we get to the scale up part? How do we, because once it leaves our innovation team where we have control and we pass it to the business unit, it's one of 500 KPIs they care about and it's harder. And so they don't support it. How do you think of that transition to the scale up?
Well, one, I think it kind of goes back to when you're meeting with the business leaders, what are their priorities? And actually, do they have budget behind those priorities? Because that's where the scale up happens. When a business leader is looking for a solution and they actually have the budget to not just run a pilot or proof of concept, but the following year, they would actually be able to commercialize that product. And so understanding the business leaders' motivations and budget is always, I think, one of the biggest keys. And then, the Katie Tuber role, as it is called now, was called the Monique Maffo role. Having someone who is championing the founder internally and making sure that on both sides of the equation, both the founder and the business leader are holding up both ends of the bargain. Having that Sherpa is critical. And that's why I think having not just an outsource partner, but an internal core team developing relationships with business leaders on an ongoing basis, which happens in the hallway, which happens at other events, which happens at leadership events. And really everyone on the team's responsibility becomes, how do we ensure that this pilot happens, that then moves into a commercial deal and works with all of the internal teams, not just the business leader, but the accounting team and procurement, to ensure that it's actually easier for the companies we're working with to get their foot in the door and stay in the door and grow once they're in the door.
Yeah, there's so many different things that have evolved that I think, huge shout out to like Luke, Laura, Tito, Katie, everybody over there, because one of the things is there's been this like reduction in founder time in the program. Like everything's been stripped, and huge shout out to my team too that works on it, Bo and Sarah, James. But like, if it is not essential, it has been removed, right? And so it's all the time is being spent on how do we help the founder accelerate the solution that works for the business unit and then some, right? And what's cool, and what I always talk to other companies about is like, Comcast Ventures is there, the other business units are there. We're seeing where this is. VentureFuel also helps with, hey, if this product is really interesting for companies non-competitive outside of Comcast, we can help you get there, right? So what we're trying to do is create this tremendous value proposition for the founder, but that's all based on what the Comcast value need is, right? And so when you connect those two and you really remove all the bias, right? And it's like, why are we doing this? And everyone puts their cards on the table and we go, okay, this is what's in it for the founder. This is what's in it for the various opportunities at Comcast. VentureFuel builds the connective tissue, right? Like that's where this is really, it jumps, which is really cool. And something we are often preaching is like, you need these various Sherpas is a great word, right? Like Katie's a rock star of going, and Luke too, and then Laura, all of them like, okay, so-and-so this business unit said this is the opportunity for this. Let's go validate that. Now we have a path, not only for the first part. It's not about the first deal. It's about that second scale up. And so knowing that, and this goes back to your why. So anybody that's sort of early on in their journey, I always say like, hey, we do call it future casting. What's the press release about this program 5 years from now? And what do you want the bosses to talk about? And then let's reverse engineer to deliver that. And I think that sounds very like McKinsey, right? And no offense to McKinsey, but it's like, okay, what is the quick wins to the 5-year vision? Because you have to deliver value, if not quarterly, on an annual basis that shows, hey, we're moving towards this big opportunity. And there might be multiple pathways down here, but like, that's the part that I think has really been powerful about this. So let me go to Dennis's question. And by the way, anyone watching, listening, come at us. Throw the questions out there. Anything goes. Ask me anything is the title. So you can ask Danielle whatever crosses your mind. But Dennis asked, what does your vetting process look like from the beginning of the funnel, and how do you decide what moves forward and when to move something else, to shelf it? And I'm assuming this is a startup question in terms of like, how do you figure out where in the funnel it goes? But I'm also going to add on to it and ask you separately on some of the corporate stuff. But just from a startup standpoint, how would you answer that, Danielle?
Yeah, I think it's it really now it's like so dependent on the stage of the company. And there is an entire funnel of early stage companies that all major companies are tracking, right? Like, how are they doing in their initial stages? Sometimes they're looking at fundraising, but more importantly, I think for us, we were always looking at what level of traction they had with customers, and did the founder, him or herself, have success stories, and that was an early way of looking and diligencing companies. As it's gotten later, certainly the Lift Labs team and VentureFuel have their own process and rubric for making those decisions. It's usually been tied, though, to where does it sit within the focus areas? Is this something within that focus area that aligns with a business goal in some way? So AI is so broad as an example. Is it specific in, say, media, entertainment, connectivity in the AI space, or customer experience as another example? And then oftentimes it was the relationship and working with the founder, him or herself. Did that, was that person or team developed in a way that you felt like the Sherpas of the team would be proud to introduce those founders to business leaders and feel like, one, their product was a real product, that it was fully functional, not just an MVP, that it was, solving a real problem for the business. And really, like, did we feel like it could get enough traction within the program? And oftentimes, was it a big enough problem to solve? Because you can solve little problems here and there, but was it something that impacted multiple teams across the enterprise, or just one?
Yeah, I love that answer. And what's funny is when I read it, and it's definitely my skewed mind at this point, I viewed it as like, what is the vetting process for business challenges before you go find the startups, which is interesting, right? Because if you're soliciting all the businesses and they all, oh, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, which is awesome. You want all the problems, by the way. You want a big funnel of sticky stuff. It's then that second level of going back, and you want a big enough problem that it's worth solving. And I often see this as like a big problem when people launch innovation programs, is they go for the one that they can solve really fast. We'll get a win. And it's like, if it doesn't matter, it's never going to go to the scale up. It's never going to go to the second program. So you're going to get a little win that everyone's going to go, okay. And so part of me thinking about this question was, I was like, oh, how do you figure out which problems to solve is a really important funnel question. And to me, it's like, what are the biggest ones that matter strategically that aren't being solved internally? And then when you get into the startup part of it, I can follow up in the notes of this, but VentureFuel has an 8 Ps rubric, and they're all different things that we measure every startup on that we consider for any client. But the Ps are product, price, all different types of things, performance, right? The biggest one for us, and it's why VentureFuel is very unique, is the word pairing. Does this startup pair with this corporate and what their long-term vision is? And that's our first one. That's our North Star, is like, does this founder work well with this organization? Does it have potential to move the needle? And potential is a very big one on the Ps, right? So there's all different rubrics and ways of thinking about it, but I think you have to start with a problem that's worth solving. That dovetails very nicely into the next question here, which is when you're looking at problems to solve, how should a program look different if it's focused on the core business of the corporate versus adjacency? When you start to go beyond what the BU's daily goals are, how do you think about that to make sure it's still adding tangible value?
Yeah, I think for us, what we discovered was things that got too close to the core were actually not a fit for innovation. It was really hard to pull in business leaders to do that. So we almost always sat a little bit adjacent versus in the core business. And so, I think that no matter what, we still felt like there was a place within the business where this company that we are partnering with potentially would have a home if they were acquired, or they were going to have a budget to hire them, or to help them commercialize what they were doing. So that's, I think, the sort of short answer to that. At the same time, oftentimes strategic development can be a place for a growth company to start off. And so as long as there was a leader within strategic development who believed in a company and wanted to, potentially test it, pilot it, yes, we would work with them. If it was for insights only, we would not, because that was not fair to the founder.
Whoa. So this came up this morning for me. Is I always say that like a founder's most precious resource is time, and we should not ask for it unless there is a value exchange there. And it's really interesting when you're doing the insights work. You want to gather as much insights as you can without talking to a founder. Now, there are moments where you need the founder or a VC to fill in the sort of secret sauce of where the puck is going. But you only do that if you can add some sort of other value, right? And I think a lot of folks in this world tend to abuse the founder's time and ask them lots of questions and get them to do stuff with no intent of ever doing anything else. So that's a core belief for me as a multi-time founder, that like you have to respect that time. I think what's interesting is, in as much as you all like have been adjacent focused, and over time, I think there's been core pieces that have come into the Comcast part of things. We have other clients that were just on the core, and it's a really interesting dynamic switch for how you structure a program, because now you're leaning into the not invented here syndrome challenges because you're walking into their wheelhouse. And so the way I always think about it is, yes, we're going into the core, but we're at the edge of what will become the core, right? It's new ideas, new thinking that are going to get zipped into the core, but aren't core today. And so you can think about like sustainability coming into a space that has never had sustainability, or a new material science technology that's over here, but is going to be used in the core application. And so oftentimes the word adjacent and core, like we kind of play with them very creatively on our side. But we have a lot of clients now, and this is different than 5 years ago, that are saying, this is our core business. We need to get to the future of our core business. And we're willing to look at the edge and adjacency and some nascent things coming in that we're going to evolve to become the core. And so I think that's
Yeah,
what's in the world.
I think that's all good perspective. And for us, it was really also around the like intellectual property. We had a team that would review all the companies we were about to work with, and they would say, you cannot work with this company. It's way too close to a patent we own. So if it was too close to the core and there was any sense that we would somehow, or they would learn secrets of some sort, it was off the table. So adjacencies, yes, 100%. Something too close to the core. And honestly, like it's in the founder's best interest to also just structure a lot of guardrails for themselves in a situation like that, as well as the corporate.
We've gotten to know the IP lawyers in the room very well over the years for those reasons, because you need to protect both sides and interests, and especially as you get closer to the core, there's a real need to be clear on both people's expectations at that point. So knowing that we are down to our last 6 minutes here, my question for you would be, how do you think this work, and I'll call it corporate innovation for a large, call it corporate venturing, whatever title you want to do. Where do you think it's going? How do you think it will look different in the next 2 to 5 years from where it is today or has been?
Yeah, I think that where you're taking the model and have taken the model, I think that's where it's going. Finding a partner who can bring incredible value to the table, customize programs, work with the corporate partner to help them meet their goals, and to demonstrate the business value and have big wins and big results. I just think that's where so much of it is going. Again, it depends on the goals that your leaders are giving you. If you sit within a strategic development or business development arm or the ventures team, that's very different than if you're part of, say, community impact or PR team or marketing team. So the goals still will drive everything.
Yeah.
But I also think that more and more this idea of cross-company collaborative innovation is almost becoming what change management is. I was just talking about this yesterday, and someone's like, so you do change management? I'm like, I never really thought about it that way, but the effects of cross-company collaborative innovation can oftentimes be incredible change management, and not the kind that shows up in the room that you fear, but you embrace and actually lean in on. And I just think that's where it's going. I also, the idea of cross-company, cross-corporate collaborations, finding ways for multiple companies to work together, learn together, open source things. This is in many ways not a new, function anymore. A lot of this information is made readily available, and you don't need to take a year or two to learn it. You can really dive in. You can dip your toe in with, a great partner, whether it's VentureFuel, or another partner. But it's easy to get started. And similarly to starting, I think, a tech company that used to cost an arm and a leg to start a tech company. Like, you don't need to have, a ton of resources to get started and see impact in this work. You can really find amazing value and demonstrate the business value, back to your leaders.
I love it. I'm going to curveball question you here, because a great one came in from the audience, which was, when you're first building a small but mighty team internally, what skill sets should you be looking for? Has there been a surprising superpower to do this work well? And I will say that, all the folks that we've sort of name dropped throughout this are unbelievable. And so I am curious, and they have very diverse backgrounds and skill sets. Is there anything that comes to mind when you think of that surprising superpower that makes for a great corporate innovator?
So just about everyone that has been mentioned, I hired them with a few exceptions. And so know a lot of them. I think diversity is probably the number one thing. Very few of them come from a traditional, say, VC background. There are a couple who do. But the perspective is they're good people who want to help people, and they want to solve problems. And they have incredible tenacity, and they care. They care about people. They care about problems. And that sounds like I don't know, to me, that's the superpower. They're good people that you want to be friends with and work with, and you'd go to war for. And they'll do the same for, they'll do that on behalf of the company, and make sure that the company is represented extremely well, and the priorities are met, and the goals are met. And they'll equally champion founders and make sure that they're on both sides kind of coming to the table with all they got.
I love it. I think what's really interesting, and when I think of, like Laura Plunkett, I'd love to be on an airplane sitting next to Laura. It's just fun. And Luke, I have a beer with this person, right? But not only is it fun, but they want to solve problems. They love this. They love not accepting the status quo, but looking on the edges for new and better solutions. And I think that is a tremendous personality trait, right? Because the easiest way isn't always this way, but the most interesting and the biggest potential is this way. And so people that have that spark inside of them. So Danielle, thank you. You've always had that spark inside of you, and I appreciate you sharing all your wisdom and time here today. For everyone listening, please follow us on LinkedIn at VentureFuel. Tune into our podcast, the VentureFuel Visionaries podcast. We will we'll turn this into a podcast and share it out with folks. But Danielle, thank you for all the work you're doing to spark change, both historically and now with Wave Ventures, and for being such a great thought leader in the space. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Fred. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.